Hello everyone, welcome back to Game-Based Instruction. This is week 7 and we're here to look at the question, how do games adapt for learner needs? Now before we get into this week's content, I want to take a look back at some of the different educational aspects in games. A lot of games have instructional supports kind of built into them. These are things that help you learn how to play the game, or maybe learn about the different aspects of the game or different levels. Often games will have tutorials when you begin that teach you how to play the game. Sometimes these have signaling, maybe text box pop-ups or circles on screen or arrows of where to go. On classic WoW, the thing was always quest givers had an exclamation point over their head so you could visually see where the quest was and where you're supposed to go. Games also often have graphic organizers where maybe they're tables or charts or maps, things that help you navigate the game and organize your thoughts within the game. A lot of games also give feedback as a way to help that educational process. And we've talked about feedback in here before. There's lots of types, whether it's audio-visual feedback. Okay, we can look at the different timing of the feedback within a game, whether it's immediate or whether it's maybe at the end of the level, right? We could look at, is feedback outcome-based or process-based? And kind of how students handle that feedback based on the type that's being given is really important. Okay, we want our students to be encouraged when they're playing the game to do better. We don't want them to be discouraged by the feedback just telling them they lose over and over, right? Some games are rougher than others. So feedback and being aware of it and how it's given out is a really important thing in game-based instruction. Next, coaching. Okay, if we want students to do better, a lot of times we want to coach them up. We want to tell them about the process before they do it, not just after, like in the forms of feedback. Okay, coaching can come in a lot of ways in games. Obviously, there's in-person coaching, where you might teach the students directly how to play. Maybe you put it on the screen and explain. Maybe you make a video. Maybe you're just sitting next to the student and telling them how to play the game and explaining the concepts, right? But there's definitely, you can do in-person coaching. You can have characters within the game that do coaching. Right? In video games, we call these NPCs, which stands for non-player characters. And you can definitely have NPCs that serve as a coach, a guide, a mentor, all sorts of things. Right? In a lot of games, NPCs will drop various hints as you play them. Sometimes they're super relevant to the plot and really helpful, and sometimes they're not. So kind of how you use those NPCs is up to you or the game developer. But definitely a lot of potential there for learning. And finally, game mechanics, right? Sometimes there are other mechanics that you can build in to teach different aspects of the game. It doesn't always have to come from a character specifically. And finally, the last thing I wanted to talk about with the educational aspects of games is digital citizenship. Because nothing blows up a learning environment like students being toxic to one another. Toxic is a term of just being really rotten, treating people badly. You're kind of poisoning the whole game experience for everyone. And really, it's important to have students respect each other and treat each other properly so we can have that safe learning environment. Okay, so digital citizenship, a very important aspect of gaming. Okay, the last thing you want to do is add a game to your class and have all your students treat each other poorly in the game, and now you're just putting out fires because so-and-so said this about me on the game. What are you going to do about it? Mr. Trutthaway, go get him, right? And you don't want to have to play referee of students talking back and forth and chirping, and sometimes they grief each other is the term. Griefing when you kill someone in an inappropriate way in a game, or you're just overall trying to make their experience bad. But a lot of that happens when these kids are playing games at home. So it's really important that we really teach them how to be appropriate for whatever community we're playing the game in, whether that's school appropriate or appropriate for the job site or whatever community you're playing this game in. Okay, we want to make sure that we're appropriate for that setting, that we're respecting everyone. Okay, we're not sour winners or sore losers. We're treating everyone with respect, and we're being safe at the end of the day, right? We have to be careful with students' identities online, student data, and we have to be very careful with who they're making connections with and all that sort of stuff. That all kind of rolls into that idea of digital citizenship, which I think is a really important aspect of implementing these games well in the classroom. Now, just a quick reminder of our overall goal, our big picture objective. This unit, we want to be able to evaluate the potential of a game to help students meet learning objectives. And to help us do that today, we're really going to focus on if a game's difficulty is aligned with our learners' needs or not. All right, now the first idea I want to talk about this week is the idea of personalization. And Plass and friends in our Handbook of Game-Based Learning have kind of 3 categories of personalization that they talk about. The first is customization in games. Okay, customization is when users can modify settings and choose options based on their preferences. Okay, this is the settings menu when you log into a new game, right? You get to choose the difficulty, how many players, what outfit your character is wearing, right? All sorts of things can be customized in these different games. But customization is when the user gets to make the choice based on their own personal preferences. Plass also talks about adaptivity. Adaptivity is when the game can modify settings based on assessed variables. Okay, so now the game is doing some assessment behind the scenes. It's checking some variable, and it's using that to make decisions about the game. Okay, so adaptivity can be something as simple as you cannot do level 2 of this game until you beat level 1. Right? You must unlock the next level. And once you beat level 1, the game recognizes they've beaten level 1 and it will unlock level 2 for you. Another example, let's look at Tetris. Okay, on Tetris, level 1, the pieces move very slow. Level 2, they move faster. Level 3, they move faster, and they keep speeding up every level. So sometimes the difficulty can be dynamic and change as you're going based on what the game is assessing. And a good educational game could do this both ways. Right? Maybe you're doing math problems in this game, and if you get the problem right, it'll give you a harder problem. Or if you get the problem wrong, maybe it gives you an easier problem. Okay, so you can see how games, if they start adapting, can really find out what our learner needs and kind of what level they should be at. And the third type of personalization Plass talks about is kind of a combination of the first two. And then they call it adaptability. And a game's adaptability is a representation of the user's modifying settings based on assessed variables. Okay, so now the game is collecting information, but it's reporting that information back to the user, and the user can make the decision. Okay, this is things like maybe at the end of the level, the game tells you what % you got correct. And then you can adjust your difficulty based on that. Or something as simple as maybe you fail a level because of some failure condition. And the game stops and asks you, would you like to reduce the difficulty? Right? That's adaptability in games. So next, let's talk about some of the variables these games might track. The first variable type given by Plass and friends in their table 10.1 here is cognitive variables. Okay, these are the kind of the traditional skills we're looking at in the classroom. These are the skills that are most likely to appear in the standards, right? Cognitive variables are things like assessing current knowledge, current skills, developmental level, language proficiency, learning strategies, cognitive abilities and skills, and finally self-regulation. Okay, so cognitive is thinking, and these are all different variables that measure our learner's ability to think in some way. And you can see how these would be very useful as educators and also useful when designing an educational game or using a game for educational purposes, right? If the game is assessing the skill we want it to assess, then chances are that is a great game for us to incorporate in our game-based instruction. And games also might track motivational variables. Things like individual interest, situational interest, goal orientation, theory of intelligence, self-efficacy, and persistence are all things Plass has identified as important for games to track and to use to kind of make these decisions, right? These are all tools that the game can kind of probe and pull at or guess at to try to figure out what our learner needs and what will put our learner in the best position to learn and to continue playing this game. And in some cases, we might look at affective variables in games. Okay, these are variables tied to the user's emotional state. Things like appraisals or what they value, their ability to regulate emotions, or even maybe the learner's general attitude about a topic or the game itself or an idea. Right? These are all things that might be assessed in a game and used in various ways. And finally, Plass recognizes that the game might also assess some socio-cultural variables. Things like social context of a situation or idea, the cultural context, the identity and self-perception, relatedness, and social agency. Okay, so all of these, once again, are important to the learner and the learning process, so it makes sense that some games might try to assess them and gather information about them so that they can improve that learning process. Next, I wanted to take a look at some assessment examples in games. This is truly a very wide region of ideas, right? There are a lot of different things that games assess, and they do it in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's in front of the user, sometimes it's behind the scenes. Okay, but just to give us a few examples, whenever we talk about assessment, we like to talk formative and summative. Right? Formative is how we form the ideas, so it is ongoing assessment, while summative tends to be kind of a summation of how the student's doing. So summative assessment is at the end. Okay, so let's take a look at, let's say, Guitar Hero or a typing game. How do they assess ongoing? Well, every time you type something or press a key or push the Guitar Hero, the game will check if you press the correct key or not. And then at the end of the level, you get an accuracy number. Okay, that's the summative assessment. So Guitar Hero, typing games, a great example of how computers assess as we're going, as well as at the end of the level. Next, let's look at puzzle games. Okay, maybe the formative assessment is, did you place that one piece correctly or not? And the summative assessment is, how long did it take the student to complete the puzzles? Or a city building game. Maybe the formative assessment is, did the student complete the quest to complete a building? Maybe City Hall or the fire station. And maybe you give them summative reports. Maybe there's monthly statistics in the game of how the student's doing on various metrics. Okay, games like SimCity, City Skylines, right? They all use these ideas. They give quests to guide the learner, and then they check on how they're doing along the way, and then they like to give you statistics at different breakpoints to kind of show you how you're doing overall. Okay, a few more examples here. In a math game, okay, the formative assessment might be they check, did you get the correct answer to a specific problem? And maybe if you answer all the problems correctly on level, then you complete that level and you get to go to the next level of the game. Okay, so you can see kind of this balance here. We want to do both formative and summative whenever possible, really, in education. And finally, Battleship. Okay, the formative assessment here. I wanted to throw one board game in. When you take a guess, you know if you hit or miss, or if you sunk a ship. Okay, so you're getting that formative feedback there. In this case, the game's not really assessing it, it's your partner, but that still works. And then the summative assessment is, did you win or lose the game, right? Did you win or lose the naval battle? So there's a lot of different types of assessment in games. It's just a few examples here. I think the big thing, though, when you're looking at it is thinking about, is that assessment ongoing or is that assessment at the end of something? And that's the big difference between formative and summative, but both are important, both drive learning, and both kind of help our learners know what they should be doing and how good of a job they're doing. Now, we've talked about variables that might be worth assessing in games. We've talked about formative versus summative assessment. But what do we do once we have this data, right? How do these games use this assessment data? Well, since we're looking at everything from an educational perspective, I think the biggest thing that games should be doing with this data is helping our student reach that zone of proximal development, right? That sweet spot of something they couldn't learn on their own, but what they can learn with our game, right? And now, how do we help our students reach that zone of proximal development? Well, one of the big ideas is scaffolding. Okay, are you building that stairwell to success? Are you giving them levels that get progressively harder, but start at an appropriate entry level? Okay, and that might be done with levels in a game, quests in a game, difficulty options, okay, easy, medium, hard, that sort of thing. But if we have students if we have good scaffolding, that allows students to kind of work their way up to the harder problems, the harder levels, that sort of thing. Okay, games can also use that assessment data to provide feedback. Okay, we've talked about formative and summative already. Okay, formative feedback might be something as simple as playing a sound, whether you hit the Guitar Hero button correctly or not. Maybe it shows a picture on the screen or an animation. And summative feedback, this is really common because so many games are level-based, right? So you might complete a level, complete a task, complete a quest, and then you get feedback at the end on how you did, right? 3 out of 5 stars, or they give you a score number. You got 8,000 points, so that's good, but not as high as the top score, right? But the important thing, though, is that the game is assessing these variables, it's collecting data, and it's then reporting that back to the student in some way. And finally, games can use this assessment data to make changes to the learning environment. Okay, maybe, let's say, if a student doesn't solve a problem in 10 in-game minutes, a character walks in and gives them a hint. Right? That is a change to the learning environment that helps the student, and that was done after assessing that they had not solved the problem after 10 minutes, right? Other things, maybe there are hints that pop up. Maybe there are options that make it easier. Okay, but our game should be assessing what is happening, if the learner is successful or not, and then trying to make changes to help them be successful if they're not. If they're not succeeding already. Now, using that data to affect the learning environment was so important to Plass that they made a nice little figure here to demonstrate what's going on. They call this the learning environment adaptivity loop. The idea is you place a student into a learning environment. They attempt some problem or skill, right? They have their performance. The game assesses how they do, and then the game adapts in some way, right? So you try it, you're placed in the environment, you try it out, the system collects data, and then gives you feedback and you try again. Okay, and we can see this again. Here's another version of the same loop where the adaptivity can come in many ways. Okay, as the game is assessing these variables, maybe it's adding in scaffolds or extra cues. Maybe it's giving the learner feedback or guidance. Okay, maybe it's something as simple as a rehearsal schedule. Maybe the game knows if you didn't do great on this problem, it wants to bring it back up in the next chapter, right? So you can see there are lots of different ways that games can adapt to try to meet the needs of the learner. And what's cool about games is they are constantly assessing, as part of their gameplay loop, whether the learner is successful, and then adapting the learning environment based on that. So as the learner keeps playing, the game should get closer and closer to that proximal zone of development. Okay, we should get closer and closer to giving that student exactly what they need because we're collecting more and more information. Okay, so that's all the big content I had this week. Just to summarize some key takeaways. Okay, when we talk personalization in games, that's either the user or the game's ability to modify aspects of the game to better fit their needs. Okay, we talked about variables, right? These games can track affective, cognitive, motivational, or even socio-cultural variables, and that can help us make these personalization decisions. And then finally, under data use, right? Once we do assess these variables, we can use that data to give feedback to learners, adjust our scaffolding or difficulty level, and to just make general changes to the learning environment. All right, and the last thing I want to talk about this week was Project 2. You do not have a discussion this week. Instead, we have our game-based learning investigation, where after attending a conference on game-based learning, your department leader has asked you and your peers to start incorporating games into your curriculum. So you're going to choose a game to investigate that you think might be relevant to your course and prepare a report for your peers to read at their own leisure. Okay, so big things. You're going to choose a game that you would like to investigate. It should be relevant to your course, and the report will be for your peers to read on their own. Okay, so you don't have to explain every detail about the course. You can assume that your peers know at least the basics of it. Now, I do not care which kind of course you guys pick. The course can be any school/training topic that you'd like to work with. That's fine with me. And you kind of have some options on how to make this report. You can do a Word document, a PowerPoint presentation, or Google Slides, slide deck. You can do a video essay if you'd like. Okay, it doesn't matter to me. I want to give you guys some freedom there. But we want to do a report on a game, and I want it to include this information here. Okay, now with each of these sections, there's little sections here, 1 through 5. I would like a picture or a screenshot with each one. Okay, so for course information and game type, give me some kind of picture of that game, and then address these 5 questions. Okay, each of these sections will be worth 20 points. They either have 4 or 5 options, so that'll either be 4 or 5 points a question. And this should be pretty similar to kind of what we've been working on, right? We're looking at the game type. We're looking at gameplay. Okay, a lot of these questions are going to be similar to the discussion questions. You're going to check out the educational aspects of the game. You're going to write about the assessment and the personalization going on in the game. And then finally, there are some extension questions for the graduate students. Okay, so only do part 5 here if you are a graduate student. If you're in 426, don't worry about that. Okay, you just have to do 1 through 4 there. Okay, but this is project 2. You guys can start working on that. I have to check our calendar here, and I will give you guys a due date when I post this. But this is kind of the next thing I'd like you working on this week. I wanted to give you some time to start this, so I didn't go as in-depth on the slides this week. But yeah, pop into office hours Tuesday or Wednesday if you have any questions. I know I had to miss last week, but feeling better now. So if you need any help, just let me know. And I hope you guys have a great week.